Have you ever wondered why you can't stop? Why, despite knowing how much that addiction harms you, you keep going back to it, as if an invisible force pulls you right back in? What if I told you your addiction isn't your enemy, but a messenger? A mirror revealing parts of yourself screaming for attention from the depths of your mind. Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, discovered something shocking. Your addiction is merely the tip of the iceberg of an inner world you're desperately trying to ignore. With each compulsion, each relapse, your unconscious is sending a coded message about who you really are. Today, I'll reveal what your addiction is trying to tell you, and why understanding this message might be the key to finally breaking free. What you see as your addiction is actually just the surface of something much deeper. Think of it like an iceberg. The behavior you struggle with is only the small part visible above water. The real mass, the true cause, lies hidden beneath. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the part of yourself you've pushed away, denied, or refused to acknowledge. Every time you reach for that drink, that substance, that screen, that person who's bad for you, you're not just seeking pleasure or escape, you're unconsciously trying to fill a gap in your sense of self. The shadow contains everything you were told was unacceptable about you. Maybe as a child you learned that anger was forbidden, that sadness was weakness, or that your natural desires were shameful. So you locked those parts away, but they didn't disappear. These rejected aspects of yourself don't simply vanish when ignored. They grow stronger in the darkness of your unconscious mind. And when something is repressed with enough force, it will find indirect ways to express itself, often through behaviors that seem completely disconnected from the original emotion or need. Consider the businessman who cannot stop working, even as his health and relationships crumble around him. On the surface, his addiction appears to be about achievement and success. But dive deeper, and you might find a frightened child who was never allowed to feel worthy without constant performance. His shadow contains the vulnerable parts he cannot face, the need for rest, for unconditional love, for permission to simply exist without constant proving. The substance or behavior you're addicted to often has symbolic meaning. It compensates for what your conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. Addiction to control might mask a deep fear of chaos. Addiction to numbing substances might cover unbearable emotions. Addiction to validation might hide profound self-doubt. Jung believed these patterns aren't random. They're meaningful communications from your psyche. Your addiction is actually trying to help you, albeit in a destructive way. It's attempting to restore balance to a fragmented self. The problem isn't that you're broken or weak-willed. It's that you're incomplete, with essential parts of yourself locked away where you can't integrate them. This understanding changes everything. Instead of fighting against your addiction as an enemy, you can start seeing it as a distress signal, a symptom pointing toward the real issue. The question transforms from, how do I stop this behavior, to, what is this behavior trying to tell me about the parts of myself I've rejected? Healing begins not with more willpower or self-punishment, but with curiosity. What emotions arise just before you engage in your addictive behavior? What uncomfortable truth might you be avoiding? What need is going unmet? The shadow doesn't respond to force. It responds to acknowledgement. Jung described this process as making the darkness conscious. By turning toward what you've been running from, you begin to reclaim lost parts of yourself. The energy that once fueled your addiction becomes available for genuine growth and creativity. This doesn't mean your darkness vanishes. It means it no longer controls you from the shadows. The first step isn't abstinence, it's awareness. Begin by simply noticing the moments before your compulsion takes over. What thought crossed your mind? What feeling arose in your body? Stay present with that discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. This small act of consciousness is revolutionary. You're turning toward your shadow rather than letting it drive your behavior from behind. As Jung himself wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Your addiction isn't your fate. It's a messenger trying to lead you back to wholeness. And that journey begins with the courage to look at what you've been avoiding, not with judgment, but with compassion for all the parts of yourself you were never taught how to love. Now that you've glimpsed your shadow, those rejected parts of yourself driving your addiction from behind the scenes, it's time to understand the empty space they've left behind. That hollow feeling inside you, the one your shadow creates when parts of yourself are exiled, has a name. Jung called it the void, and he discovered something remarkable about it. This emptiness isn't actually empty at all. It's full of potential. It's the space where your authentic self is waiting to emerge once you've reclaimed those shadow aspects. When we feel this inner void, our first instinct is to run from it. We'll do anything to avoid that uncomfortable emptiness. Spend money we don't have, lose ourselves in relationships that hurt us, work until we collapse, scroll endlessly through screens, or numb ourselves with substances. The addiction becomes our shield against having to face this apparent nothingness within. But what if this void isn't your enemy? What if it's actually the birthplace of who you're meant to become? Jung believed that this emptiness is actually pregnant with possibility. It's the space where your soul is quietly working to bring all parts of yourself into harmony, a process he called individuation. Think about what happens in nature. A seed needs empty space to grow. A butterfly needs the void of the cocoon to transform. In the same way, your psyche needs this apparent emptiness to evolve beyond old patterns and limited ideas of who you are. Your addiction is a misguided attempt to fill this space before its natural process can unfold. It's like trying to force a butterfly out of its cocoon before it's ready. The transformation gets interrupted. The void feels unbearable because you've been taught that emptiness is failure, that stillness is wasted time, that uncertainty is weakness. But these are false lessons. The truth is that your soul knows exactly what it's doing in creating this void. It's clearing space for something authentic to emerge. Every addiction is a substitute for this natural process, a counterfeit wholeness that temporarily relieves the anxiety of transformation but ultimately prevents it. Consider how many people report feeling an inexplicable emptiness even after achieving everything society told them would bring fulfillment. The perfect job, relationship, home, or body. The void persists because these external achievements can't satisfy what's actually a spiritual hunger for wholeness and meaning. Jung observed that modern society offers countless ways to avoid this inner work. We're surrounded by distractions, quick fixes, and cultural messages telling us we're nothing more than our productivity or appearances. But the soul has its own agenda, and it will create crisis after crisis until we finally listen to what it's trying to tell us through our suffering. The addiction you battle isn't just about the substance or behavior itself. It's about avoiding the discomfort of becoming your full self. It's easier to remain in the known pain of addiction than to face the unknown territory of transformation. This is why willpower alone rarely works long-term. You're not just fighting a habit, you're fighting against your own evolution. Healing begins when you start to reframe this void not as something to escape, but as sacred space. Instead of seeing your emptiness as failure, you might begin to see it as the universe creating room for something new to be born within you. The uncomfortable feelings you've been running from, uncertainty, vulnerability, loneliness, aren't obstacles to your happiness, but doorways to your authenticity. This doesn't mean the void feels good. Transformation is rarely comfortable. But there's a profound difference between pain that leads nowhere and pain that leads to growth. Your addiction creates the first kind, an endless cycle of temporary relief followed by deeper emptiness. Facing your void creates the second kind, the growing pains of becoming whole. As you move forward, you might start asking different questions. Instead of, how do I stop feeling empty? Try asking, what is this emptiness making space for? Instead of, how do I escape this discomfort? Ask, what might this discomfort be trying to teach me? The answers won't come from outside yourself, but from listening to the wisdom of your own deeper nature, the very thing your addiction has been drowning out all this time. If you feel ready to explore your inner world on a deeper level, to reconnect with the parts of yourself you've ignored or forgotten, take a look at the SIM Method ebook. It's a short, practical guide designed to help you balance your shadow and your light in just a few minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment below. After discovering how your addiction stems from the shadow and creates a void yearning for wholeness, we now turn to the masks you wear in daily life. Your addiction isn't just revealing your hidden shadow or the emptiness within, it's also exposing the false face you present to the world. Jung called this mask the persona, and understanding its relationship with your addictive behaviors opens another door to freedom. The persona is the version of yourself you show to others, your social mask. It's the good employee, the perfect parent, the responsible citizen, the tough guy, or the always happy friend. Doom. We all develop these masks as a necessary way to function in society. They help us navigate social expectations and protect our vulnerable inner selves from a world that might not always be safe. But problems arise when you become too identified with your mask, when you forget it's just a role you're playing and start believing it's who you really are. This creates an impossible internal tension. The more perfectly you try to maintain your persona, the more pressure builds within your psyche. Your addiction often emerges precisely at this breaking point. Think about how many people maintain flawless public images while their private lives spiral into addiction. The business executive who projects confidence and control but secretly drinks each night to quiet the voice saying she's a fraud. The social media influencer who promotes wellness while privately battling eating disorders. The religious leader preaching virtue while hiding compulsive behaviors. The greater the gap between mask and reality, the more powerful the compulsion becomes. Your addiction serves as a pressure release valve for this internal conflict. It creates a secret space where you can temporarily escape the exhaustion of maintaining your perfect mask. But it also reveals the truth your persona is trying to hide, that you're human, with needs and limitations that don't fit neatly into your idealized self-image. What's fascinating is how the specific addiction often directly contradicts the persona. The person who presents themselves as completely in control becomes addicted to experiences that involve surrender. The one who projects purity becomes fixated on what they consider dirty. The one who appears entirely self-sufficient becomes dependent on something external. Your addiction is like a photographic negative of your persona, revealing everything your mask tries to hide. This pattern isn't random. Jung would say it represents your psyche's desperate attempt to restore balance. When your conscious mind over-identifies with one extreme, your perfect persona, your unconscious pulls you toward the opposite extreme, your addiction. Neither represents your whole truth. They're two sides of the same coin, both distortions of who you really are. Society encourages this split. We're taught to present only our best selves while hiding our struggles. Social media amplifies this pressure, creating endless opportunities to curate a flawless image while hiding our messy reality. No wonder addiction rates have soared in this era of constant performance. When you're never allowed to be imperfect in public, the need for a private escape becomes overwhelming. The healing path requires honesty about this dynamic. Can you recognize the mask you wear most often? What parts of yourself does this persona leave no room for? How might your addiction be trying to express exactly these disowned qualities? The persona itself isn't the problem. It becomes problematic only when it's rigid, when it allows no space for your full humanity. True freedom begins with simple authenticity, allowing yourself moments where the mask can safely come off. This doesn't mean broadcasting your struggles to everyone or abandoning all social boundaries. It means finding safe relationships and spaces where you can be honest about your imperfections without shame. It means gradually bringing your public self closer to your private truth, reducing the tension that fuels your compulsions. As Jung himself noted, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This journey involves neither perfect performance nor complete abandonment to impulse. It means integrating both your light and shadow into a whole that no longer needs the extremes of rigid control or compulsive release. Your addiction has been showing you something important all along, the parts of yourself you've been afraid to acknowledge. By paying attention to this message, you begin transforming your relationship with both your persona and your compulsions. You start creating a life where you can meet your deeper needs directly, rather than through the detour of addiction. A life where you no longer need to be perfect, just authentically whole. Having examined how addiction exposes both your shadow and your social mask, we now face a painful truth: the way your unconscious mind actively undermines your conscious intentions. This connects directly to your persona's exhausting performance. When you've maintained a false front for too long, your deeper self rebels through what Jung recognized as self-sabotage. The pattern is heartbreakingly familiar. You make a firm decision to change. You're absolutely committed this time. You throw away the substances, delete the apps, cut off the toxic relationships. For days or weeks, everything goes well. You feel strong, clear-headed, finally in control. Then seemingly out of nowhere, you find yourself doing exactly what you swore you wouldn't do, often in a more extreme way than before. This isn't simple weakness. It's your unconscious mind taking the wheel. Jung understood that when conscious intentions become too one-sided, too rigid, perfectionistic, or disconnected from your deeper nature, the unconscious creates a counter-move. It's like a pendulum that swings harder in the opposite direction the further you pull it to one side. The language of addiction reflects this inner division. People describe feeling possessed, overtaken, or not themselves during relapse. They report watching themselves act as if from outside their bodies, unable to stop despite knowing the consequences. This isn't dramatic exaggeration. It's an accurate description of what happens when unconscious forces override conscious control. The trigger for this takeover is often a state Jung called inflation. This occurs when your conscious mind becomes grandiose, believing it has total control. I've finally mastered this. I'll never slip again. My willpower is unbreakable now. The bigger this inflated belief becomes, the more powerfully your unconscious will move to deflate it, creating what feels like an almost supernatural compulsion to fail precisely when you felt most certain of success. This pattern of inflation and collapse explains why traditional approaches focused solely on conscious willpower so often backfire. The more you tighten your grip, the more slippery the addiction becomes. The more you declare never again, the more your unconscious prepares its counterattack. It's not that your conscious intentions don't matter, it's that they represent only half the equation. The self-sabotage cycle gains much of its power from shame. When you relapse, you don't just experience the negative consequences of the behavior itself. You also face crushing shame about your perceived weakness and failure. This shame then drives you right back to the addictive behavior that temporarily relieves it, creating a closed loop that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. What makes this cycle especially insidious is how it confirms your worst fears about yourself. Each failure becomes evidence that you're fundamentally broken, weak, or unworthy, the very beliefs that drive the addiction in the first place. The unconscious becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating the very reality it fears most. Breaking free requires a fundamentally different relationship with your unconscious mind. Instead of trying to dominate it through sheer force of will, you begin to listen to it with respect. You approach your self-sabotaging patterns not as the enemy, but as communication, your psyche's distress signals showing where integration is needed. This shift transforms how you view relapse. Rather than seeing it as catastrophic failure, you recognize it as valuable information. Each time your unconscious overtakes your conscious intentions, it's highlighting exactly where healing is needed. What triggered this episode? What emotion preceded it? What need was your psyche trying to meet through this behavior? These questions turn failure into insight. Jung believed that true change happens not through control, but through dialogue between the conscious and unconscious parts of yourself. This dialogue requires humility, recognizing that your conscious mind isn't the only valid voice within you. It also requires compassion, understanding that your unconscious patterns, however destructive, began as attempts to protect you from pain you weren't equipped to handle. The way forward isn't perfect performance, but honest integration. Instead of swinging between rigid control and complete collapse, you begin building a middle path. You learn to recognize the warning signs of inflation before the pendulum swings. You develop the courage to feel difficult emotions without immediately escaping into addiction. You create space for your deeper needs to be acknowledged before they have to scream for attention through destructive behavior. As Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The self-sabotage cycle is painful precisely because it's trying to wake you up, to show you where your conscious understanding of yourself is incomplete. By respecting this process, rather than fighting against it, you begin transforming your greatest source of suffering into your greatest teacher. After seeing how your addiction emerges from self-sabotage cycles driven by your unconscious mind, we now explore how your dependency functions as a twisted form of ritual. This directly connects to those unconscious forces we just examined. When your deeper self cannot find authentic meaning, it creates counterfeit sacred experiences through addiction. There's something eerily ceremonial about addiction. Notice the precise routines that surround your compulsive behaviors, the specific time of day, the exact preparation, the familiar environment, the anticipation that feels almost like prayer. These aren't random habits, they're rituals. And understanding their spiritual dimension reveals why they hold such power over you. Jung recognized that humans have an innate need for meaningful ritual and symbolic experience. For thousands of years, cultures worldwide created ceremonies to mark transitions, process emotions, connect with something larger than themselves, and make meaning of suffering. These rituals weren't optional cultural decorations, they were essential psychological tools for maintaining inner balance. Modern society has largely stripped away these ritual spaces. We've been taught that the material world is all that exists, that success means productivity and consumption, that suffering has no meaning beyond something to be eliminated. We've lost our symbolic vocabulary, but our need for ritual hasn't disappeared. It's simply gone underground, emerging in distorted forms. Your addiction is one such form. The alcoholic treating their evening drinks with reverence, the gambler who experiences the casino as a temple, the digital addict who checks social media with the regularity of ancient prayer times, all are engaging in substitute rituals. They're attempting to create sacred space in a desacralized world. What makes these addiction rituals so compelling is that they temporarily work. They do create altered states of consciousness. They do provide relief from ordinary awareness. They do offer communion with forces beyond the rational mind. They do mark transitions between different states of being. In these ways, they fulfill the psychological function of genuine ritual, but in a form that ultimately destroys rather than heals. The difference lies in integration. True ritual connects you more deeply with yourself, your community, and the natural world. It helps you process difficult emotions and transitions. It gives suffering meaning and context. Addiction rituals, by contrast, create temporary escape and false transcendence. They disconnect you from yourself, others, and reality. They postpone rather than process emotional pain. This explains why many recovery programs intuitively incorporate ritual elements: daily meetings, sharing stories, marking sobriety milestones, reciting mantras or prayers. They're not just support systems, they're providing the healthy ritual containers that were missing. They're acknowledging the spiritual dimension of addiction that purely medical or psychological approaches often overlook. Jung himself noted how many of his alcoholic patients improved only after having what he called spiritual experiences, moments of connection with something beyond the small self. He famously influenced the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous with this insight. The 12 steps aren't just recovery techniques, they're a ritual journey designed to fulfill the spiritual needs that addiction attempts to satisfy in destructive ways. Looking at your own dependency through this lens changes everything. What legitimate need for ritual and meaning might your addiction be trying to fulfill? What transitions are you struggling to process? What emotions need sacred space for expression? What forms of communion are you seeking through your compulsive behaviors? For many, addiction intensifies during life's major transitions. Adolescence, relationship changes, career shifts, midlife, retirement, grief. These passages historically would have been marked by community rituals providing structure, meaning, and support. Without these containers, the psyche creates its own through addiction, a desperate attempt to navigate transition without proper tools. The healing path involves reclaiming authentic ritual. This doesn't necessarily mean adopting formal religious practices, though many find help there. It means creating intentional practices that acknowledge your need for meaning, transition, and communion. Morning meditation instead of morning drinks, evening journaling instead of evening binges, weekly nature walks instead of weekly gambling trips, community volunteering instead of solitary scrolling. These alternative rituals must address the same psychological needs as your addiction, but in ways that connect rather than disconnect. They should create altered awareness through mindfulness rather than mindlessness. They should process emotion rather than suppress it. They should build meaningful connection rather than illusory escape. The most powerful replacement rituals often involve creativity, art, music, dance, writing, activities that engage both your conscious and unconscious mind in dialogue. Jung saw creative expression as one of the most direct ways to communicate with deeper parts of yourself, giving form to what's trying to emerge from your unconscious without the destructive aspects of addiction. As you build these new rituals, approach them with the same seriousness you give your addiction. Your dependency has shown you how devoted you can be to a practice. That same devotion, redirected toward healthy ritual, becomes a powerful force for transformation. Your capacity for commitment isn't the problem. It's been misplaced in addiction, but can be reclaimed for healing. Remember that your search for meaning isn't weakness. It's the most human thing about you. Your addiction isn't evidence of moral failure, but of spiritual hunger in a world that often denies such hunger exists. By honoring this deeper dimension of your struggle, you transform what seemed like a purely destructive force into a signpost pointing toward what your soul truly needs. Having explored how addiction functions as a distorted ritual-seeking meaning, we now arrive at the final stage of this journey: integration. This connects directly to the ritual nature of dependency we just examined. Now we'll transform those misplaced sacred energies into tools for wholeness and authentic self-knowledge. Integration doesn't mean eliminating parts of yourself. It means bringing all your fragmented pieces, shadow and light, conscious and unconscious, persona and authentic self, into relationship with each other. Jung called this process individuation, becoming the unique whole individual you were meant to be, rather than remaining divided against yourself. This is why traditional approaches to addiction often fail long-term. They focus on removing the symptom without addressing the underlying fragmentation. They treat the addiction as separate from the self, rather than as a meaningful part of your psychological ecosystem. Integration takes a fundamentally different approach. It seeks to understand the addiction, rather than simply eradicate it. The first step in this integration process is radical acceptance. This doesn't mean approving of destructive behavior. It means acknowledging that your addiction, however painful, has been serving important functions in your psychological economy. It's been expressing rejected parts of yourself, filling an inner void, balancing your one-sided persona, communicating unconscious needs, and providing substitute ritual experiences. Only by first acknowledging these functions can you develop healthier alternatives. The parts of yourself expressed through addiction need other channels for expression. The void needs authentic filling. The persona needs honest balancing. The unconscious needs direct communication. The spiritual hunger needs genuine nourishment. Integration means finding constructive ways to meet these same needs. This work isn't easy. Jung compared it to alchemy, the medieval practice of transforming base metals into gold. Your addiction represents your base metal, the aspects of yourself you've judged as worthless or destructive. Integration is the alchemical process that transforms these same elements into gold, valuable wisdom and energy for your journey. The tools for this transformation are deceptively simple. Regular journaling helps you establish dialogue between conscious and unconscious parts of yourself. Dreams provide nightly messages from your deeper mind about what needs attention. Creative expression gives form to emotions that have no other language. Mindfulness practices help you stay present with discomfort rather than immediately escaping it. Authentic relationships provide mirrors reflecting both your light and shadow. What makes these practices powerful is consistency, not perfection. Small daily steps toward integration are more effective than occasional heroic efforts. Your addiction didn't develop overnight, and neither will your wholeness. The integration path is measured not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in gradually increasing moments of internal harmony and authentic choice. This process transforms your relationship with urges and cravings. Instead of seeing them as enemies to be defeated, you begin recognizing them as messengers to be understood. Each craving becomes an opportunity to ask, what is happening emotionally right now? What need is trying to express itself? What am I avoiding feeling? These questions turn addiction triggers from threats into teachers. As integration progresses, you'll notice subtle but profound shifts. The compulsive quality of your addiction begins to diminish, not because you're controlling it better, but because its psychological purpose is being fulfilled in healthier ways. The internal war between restraint and indulgence gradually transforms into a more peaceful dialogue. You still experience difficult emotions and desires, but they no longer control your behavior from the shadows. This integration process doesn't just heal addiction. It unleashes creative energy previously trapped in your internal conflicts. Jung observed that people who successfully integrate their shadow often experience unexpected creative flowering. The energy once used to maintain inner divisions becomes available for growth, connection, and contribution. Perhaps most importantly, integration changes your relationship with yourself. The harsh inner critic who labeled you addict, failure, or broken gradually softens into a wiser, more compassionate voice. You begin to see your struggles not as evidence of weakness, but as the necessary path to strength. Your wounds become sources of wisdom rather than just sources of shame. This doesn't mean you'll never struggle again. Integration isn't a state of perfect harmony. It's an ongoing process of bringing consciousness to previously unconscious patterns. There will still be difficult days, strong urges, even occasional backsliding. The difference is that these experiences no longer define you or convince you that transformation is impossible. Jung believed that the purpose of life is not happiness, but meaning, finding significance even in suffering. Through integration, your addiction is transformed from meaningless suffering into a meaningful journey toward wholeness. The very thing that seemed to be destroying your life becomes paradoxically one of your greatest teachers about who you really are and who you're capable of becoming. As Jung himself wrote, "There is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. Your addiction represents your shadow, your imperfection. But through the alchemical process of integration, these same elements become essential ingredients in the gold of your wholeness, not despite your struggles, but because of them."